Okay, this is David Zierler, Director of the Caltech Heritage Project. It is September 2nd, 2021. I am greatly honored to be back with Charlie Trimble. Charlie, it's great to see you again.
Great to be here.
Charlie, in our first session, we did a wonderful tour de horizon regarding all of your current interests and work, specifically with regard to your support, your generous support and interest in the science at Caltech. Now, let's take it back to the beginning for you. Let's start first with your parents. Tell me about them.
My father was born of American missionary parents in China. My grandfather ran a field hospital in China. So my dad spent the first 11 years of his life there. Family was basically kicked out of China because of the Civil War going on in 1928, settled in Tacoma, Washington. Father went to the university, well, it was College of Puget Sound at the time, majored in chemistry, just before the war, he was working for Shell Development in Emeryville, which is in the Bay Area, he was going to Cal. There he met my uncle, who introduced him to my mother. She had, her father actually was, I guess, the 14th child of a Pentecostal minister in the Dominican Republic. He ran away from home at 14. As I know the story, he quit a $35,000 a year job in 1936 because he didn't like the morals of the owner, and from that till the rest of his life, he would find a hilltop and build a house and sell it and repeat the process basically once a year until the year before he died. So my mother grew up in this environment, which was truly a rags to riches roller coaster ride. It was still during the time that it wasn't obvious that girls went to college. And so my mother had started higher education at a junior college in LA when her brother asked my grandfather whether it would be all right if he asked my mother to come up and keep house for it. And so that's how my mother got into Cal. And that's where my mother and father met. My father figured out how to produce trinitrotoluene from petroleum products as opposed to from the coal tar industry just before the start of the Second World War, and was not allowed to enlist. Dad always wanted to do, he hated things that involved high tension and high emotion, and he always thought he wanted a simpler life. During the war, he grew vegetables hydroponically in our backyard in El Cerrito, which is very close to Berkeley. my mother's father at the time, right at the end of the war, my mother's father was developing avocado property south of LA, in the general area of Fallbrook. And I'm not sure whether my father leaped at the chance or was talked into a 14-acre avocado ranch, but by the time I was going to go into the first grade, the family was moving down to Fallbrook to live in a used brick house that had been built on a ridge overlooking the Palomar Range, where there was 14 acres of avocados. And so that actually takes my parents up through the point that I'm about 6 years old.
Charlie, to go back to your father and his family's experience in China, what church were they part of? What was that overall missionary organization?
It was the Methodist Church.
And do you have a sense that in those 11 years he was there, did that exert a formative influence on him?
Well, it certainly exerted an influence on him, and in his later life, one of his great joys was being able to go back and try to find the house that he grew up in, the field hospital, and he managed. He managed through UPS. UPS did a trip. The president of UPS did a trip to China in 1972, and he was part of that trip. The Fujian province was still not open to tourism at the time, but he later was able to get in, and certainly he found where the house and the field hospital were. They had just recently been torn down, so they weren't there. But my grandfather wasn't the only one there. His aunt founded the first girls' college in China, in Fuzhou, and there is still a building with the name Trimble Hall on it today. The school has basically separated. Wanan College and Fujian Normal can both claim heritage to that school. And my brother has been quite actively involved with that sort of thing of late, and so was my father in his later years.
Charlie, from your parents, from your dad specifically with science, and both of your parents, particularly your mom and her abilities to get a degree when that wasn't so easy, in what ways did they instill a respect both of science and education, even from a young age for you?
Oh, well, okay. My mom never actually graduated. She basically got married at age 20, but education was really very important. And I can remember being drilled on the multiplication tables when I was 4. And I have this memory of being in a kitchen looking at the cutting board that had been pulled out of the counter. I could not see the top of the cutting board. But I certainly had been taught my multiplication tables by the time I was a little over 4. My mother read to me vociferously, so that by the time I started school, I was certainly familiar with all of the children's classics, and I'm not talking about Hat and the Cat or that class of things. I mean, it's Heidi, Swiss Family Robinson, Robinson Crusoe, Treasure Island, Tom Sawyer, those sorts of things. Clearly my mom was very, very interested in education. My father was somebody I could always go to with questions, whether they be math, science, or even in those days when I can remember, certainly in high school when I was writing papers, he would read my first draft, and my spelling was atrocious, and so I'd get the misspelled words underlined, and he would indicate when transitions were necessary between paragraphs and that sort of thing. And later on, he would drive me to the library in San Diego to do research on papers. So education was clearly very important to them.
Charlie, from both of your parents' backgrounds to your upbringing, did you grow up in a more religious or a secular household, would you say?
Well, I was clearly in a secular household in the sense that my father absolutely rebelled against the traditional Methodism that he was brought up in. But I was very involved as a young teenager in Boy Scouts, and so there was an affiliation with the local Methodist church, and I did go to Sunday school and I did go to church, I certainly was familiar. I was familiar with the Bible. I can remember a discussion that my mother had with my brother and I when my brother was still very young, and she was going through the 10 Commandments, and she got to honor thy mother and thy father so that thy days may be long in number. And my brother just broke out into this great peal of laughter. What a ridiculous statement. But so yes, in terms of awareness of Christian thought, there's no question that was there. The Christian morality Western morality was there. My mother, picked the Protestant denomination based on the minister, not on the denomination. So the household really was secular.
Did your father's rebelliousness, do you see that as being rooted in his scientific sensibilities?
No, I think maybe rebelliousness is too strong a word. he just wanted to ignore the extensive ritual that was associated and the rules. I in no part of my upbringing would I say that that I ever was aware of. Well, no part of my childhood was I aware of the Scopes trial and the conflict between the ideas of evolution and intelligent design.
Charlie, you would have been very young at the time, even a toddler, really. But do you have any memories of the United States being in World War II?
Absolutely. The blackout, the blackout curtains, the air raid sirens, the what do I want to say it? The coupons that were used for gasoline and various food items. No, I was aware that the war was going on. There's no question about that.
And this was because the threat of a Japanese attack was real on the West Coast.
It was considered real, yeah. And the house we were in was on a hillside that overlooked the Golden Gate Bridge. So, I mean, the Bay Area was certainly one that locked down.
We got up to age 6 for you. Did your family move at that point?
My family moved, from El Cerrito to Fallbrook.
Was that a step up socioeconomically?
That's hard to say. The lot and the house in El Cerrito still exists, and it's still very much in a middle class neighborhood, and while certainly the ranch house that has been built by my grandfather was quite nice, it was unconventional, and it was at the top of a hill where you basically went up a quarter of a mile long dirt road to get to. And as a matter of fact, when they first moved down, the county roads were still gravel that the road to the house led off of. So I would say that my whole life was really middle class. Now, on the ranch, we had a good life, but there was no money. So we grew vegetables. We had orange trees that would produce oranges all year round. For a while, my parents had raised chickens and rabbits, the rabbits for the pelts. And I took a school bus which picked me up at the bottom of our road to school in Fallbrook, which was 7 miles away. When I was living down there. So it was and at the time I thought people in town that had a $10,000 a year income were rich.
Charlie, growing up on the ranch, surrounded by nature, did that inform your own scientific sensibilities even as a young boy?
Well, it was, growing up on the ranch was absolutely fabulous in the sense that, a lot of the activities from age 11 to 14, 15 were driven by achievements in Boy Scouts, which did involve a lot of outdoor things, did involve nature things, um, um, and certainly, but I wouldn't say I became a biologist or a geologist because of that. In fact, I didn't. Um, but it was a very free time. It turns out that school was never. I never took school very seriously until about the 7th grade. In the 7th grade, I had a teacher that basically was really good at journalism, and she had a journalism club after school, and I ended up writing a small article weekly article for the weekly Fallbrook newspaper. And so that was when I first started actually caring much about what happened in school. And the other thing that changed at that point, it was, I was still in the 7th grade on a Boy Scout paper drive. I picked up a Caltech catalog, and that I read it, and I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
What was in that catalog that spoke to you?
It was the hardest school in the country to get into. I mean, it's the wrong reason, but it turned out it was the right choice for me.
Now, were you said it didn't make a biologist or a geologist out of you. Growing up, were you a tinkerer? Did you have chemistry sets, model airplanes, things like that?
Yeah, yes. Okay. Yes. I mean, there weren't Legos in those days, if there had been, but there were erector sets, and there were electric trains, and there were Heathkit radios that you could put together, and chemistry sets, and I did all of that stuff. The real focus on science, it hit me the same way it probably hit lots of people of my generation when Sputnik went up. It completely sealed the deal in terms of technology.
In terms of the importance of technology, you're saying?
The importance of technology and the fact that that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there were pop cans that used to have little conical shaped things coming up before you had the top that you had to use a can opener to open, and we built brick rocket launchers and put in small amounts of gasoline and a fuse and lit it, and fired things off. The sort of thing that you would truly shudder at if your child did. But I mean, the ranch was totally self-contained. I mean, we had our own gas tank and a crank pump to pump the gas. My father found that he found to his a little bit almost his horror that he that it took 7 years before avocado trees got mature enough to be economically productive. So he ended up having to work in LA at it was the Coney Mobile. Well, it became Mobil Oil finally. Uh, uh, Labs in Torrance, and he did research work there during the week, and then came down to the ranch on the weekend and ran the ranch on the weekend. And that worked. And my mother stayed there full time, working on, keeping the rabbits and chickens going until she got sick. And then that clearly wasn't going to work anymore. So she couldn't stay on the ranch during the weekends. But when Dad finally moved down to the ranch full time, he took over as manager of the local water company because he could measure the salt content of the water coming out of the wells from the local underground river, and knew how much Colorado River water had to be mixed with it so that it would be tolerated by the trees. I mean, this is pretty bad when Colorado River water has to be used to improve your local groundwater, but that was indeed the case.
Charlie, what turned around for you in 7th grade when you started to get serious in school? Was it your realization that you could learn math and science at a higher level?
No, it was that I could get A's if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And actually, I was quite fortunate because certainly in the high school, there was a math and chemistry teacher, math, chemistry, and physics. There were 2 teachers that taught those subjects, and they decided to teach accelerated classes. So, my freshman year, they crammed 2 years of algebra into one. And the next year it was geometry and trig into one. And then there was 2 years of calculus. So the math turned out to be very, very good. And obviously the physics was pre-calculus. It was algebraic, but chemistry and physics were very, very solid. And in addition, there was a really good history teacher that taught both world history and U.S. history, and a very good English teacher. So I was truly lucky in frankly a backwater a setting to have a good education.
Does that speak to California's overall support for public education, at least in those years?
Never thought of it. I never thought of it in a political sense, but yes, that's clearly pre-Proposition 13, and yes, there was more money for schools.
What teachers really exerted an influence on you in a positive way in high school?
Well, I mean, the math, chemistry, and history teachers clearly exerted real influence. And, later in high school, it was really very simple because of Sputnik. There was this tremendous shift to teaching to the top of the class. As a matter of fact, the second year calculus used the text that was used for freshman math majors at Stanford, and there were 7 people in the class. 3 of us were getting it, 4 were being carried. So this truly was extraordinary.
Was Caltech always there in the back of your mind? Or were there
Oh,
other
yeah.
schools that you were thinking about?
No, Caltech was it. Caltech was going to be the only school that I was going to go to and pay private school tuition. I mean, my safety school was Berkeley.
What about Stanford?
No way was I going to pay tuition to go to Stanford.
I'm sure the tuition was comparable. What does that really tell you about your extreme interest in Caltech?
Well, no. There's no question. I was hard over. I mean, you don't really have the story yet. The questions you've asked haven't elicited the real story. But yes, Caltech. Since the 7th grade, I never wavered.
Now, I know so far about the catalog, but were there professors, were there luminaries that were sort of public figures or that you were aware of? Was that part of your interest as well?
No. No. Well, hey, I certainly, as I went through high school, I read. We subscribed to Scientific American, and so I knew about Gell-Mann, and I knew about the particles, subatomic particles, and so I was certainly aware of what was coming out of Caltech, and that Caltech was highly prized as a place where you would go for science and technology.
And the fact that it was so hard to get into made it even more alluring to you.
Absolutely.
Because it suggested that it was a place only for the best.
Absolutely. And, it's funny. Okay, they're going to be out of order now, but I have a cousin, I think I told you, that's 3 months older than I am, and he decided to go to MIT.
Right.
My uncle, during the war, had been at the Rad Lab at MIT and had taught there. And my uncle's comment when he found that both Dale and I were going to go to the schools we were going to go to was, I really don't know why anybody in their right mind would choose to go to a place that absolutely tears you down before you get built up again.
Interesting.
And so I knew that it was a boot camp. And as a matter of fact, at the time, the numbers were really very simple. There were 180 students that came in as freshmen, and 120 of those graduated. The third that didn't graduate, well, they often went to Cal and Stanford and other places like that. But in those days, Caltech did not have a problem of the lower quartile because the lower quartile simply left. Well, somewhere along the line, Stanford and Cal decided that they didn't like the fact that they were taking Caltech rejects. And so they refused to accept Caltech students that weren't earning at least a B average. Well, if you're not earning a B average, if you're earning a B average, you're not in the lowest quartile. So they would accept people, Cal will accept people from the community colleges with a B average, but not Caltech. Anyway, so Caltech was a bit of a different place then.
Yeah.
Now, it hasn't completely changed because from everything that I understand from the Student Experience Committee and my interaction with students, the first 2 years are still a pistol bitch, but it's not quite the same.
Charlie, what year did you arrive at Caltech?
59.
Was smog an issue? Do you remember smog being a problem?
Boy, do I remember smog. There were only a few days a year that you could see Mount Wilson, probably it was more than a few days, but very often you couldn't see it. You certainly couldn't see downtown LA, and I can remember only twice with binoculars being able to see Catalina. No, it was a huge issue, and at times when it would get bad, we would say to hell with it and go off and go up to Mount Wilson and hike for a while up at Mount Wilson.
Could you get above the smog line?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was literally a breath of fresh air to get up that high.
Yeah.
Charlie, what are some of the earliest memories you have when you first arrived on campus? What sticks out in your memory?
Oh, well, the first memory is the north houses hadn't been built. So if your parents didn't live 500 miles away from campus, you had to live off campus. So I actually took a room in a house which basically is currently where Moore Walk comes into Holliston. Mm-hmm. It was the house that was next to Steelhouse, and they rented rooms to. They had 4 rooms that they rented out to Caltech students, and so for $30 a month, I got a room, and I got my own room and shared a bathroom, and I belonged to Troop Club. Troop Club was the club for off-campus undergraduates. It was in a old redwood structure next to what was the cafeteria, which was fondly called the Greasy Spoon. And so in Troop Club, I learned to major in bridge, and there were about 20 of us every night that would go down to Lake Avenue and have dinner at along the counter of the drugstore, and we made the gals that were serving us at the counter read the answers to Dear Abby, and then we would guess the questions. And out of that group came first what you want to call it. It's the name for underground journalism, but we decided that the California Tech as a newspaper for Caltech was far too staid and really wasn't any fun, and so this group started publishing a 4-page mimeograph rag that we used the mimeograph machine at the Y and distributed it for free. This was the little K. And this, the California Tech eventually took on some of the features of the little K, but the little K came to a demise because the institute frowned at some of the satirical journalism that was going on, and I think the issue that finally doomed it was the article about faculty wives. But in any event, so that was on the social life. That was my earliest memory. My earliest memory academically, I can remember feeling absolutely devastated with the final, the first term final in freshman physics. In those days, we were graded as freshmen, okay? It was no pass or fail. And I felt absolutely devastated about it. And I got it back. It was a 31. And then I found that the class average was 17 and the 31 was an A minus. So this is welcome to Caltech.
Yeah. Charlie, you mentioned Sputnik being there only 2 years after. Did you have a sense that this would really spur a boon in the federal government's support of science?
Very frankly, I didn't think that deeply about the economics of higher education. I did know that it immediately spawned a shift in teaching at the high school level.
Did you feel the Cold War during your undergraduate years? Was that palpable?
Well, it was extremely palpable because, all right, the parts of the story that we've skipped over. To answer your Cold War question, when I was a sophomore in high school, my uncle suggested he was visiting. He was a civilian advisor for the Air Force at the time, working out of Wiesbaden, and he suggested that it might be a good idea for me to spend a year studying in Germany between high school and college, and becoming emotionally independent before I go off to college. And I thought that was a neat idea, but I wasn't willing to waste a year on it. So I decided to take my junior and senior years of high school at the same time, which I did.
You doubled up, essentially.
I doubled up. This led to a whole series of problems, because even though I took 2 summer courses, the high school I was in had 6 classes, and one of them had to be PE, and you needed 200 units to graduate if you were going to college, and 220 to graduate otherwise, and you could get a maximum of 240. Okay, so I was only going to have 180 by having 3 of the 4 years, so I had to pick up 20 during the summer. So I picked up elementary German and analytic geometry as correspondence courses. That gave me my 200. But when I put the rest of the schedule together, I did not have room for 4 years of English. I had room only for 3 years of English. But 4 years of English were required for a college prep diploma. My mother at the time was on the high school school board, and they were in the process of firing the superintendent. The superintendent wasn't about to graduate me without having that box checked. Fortunately, the nephew of the rancher next door was a fellow by the name of Bill Cochran, who was a professor of chemical engineering at Caltech and on the admissions committee. So I asked him if Caltech would require a high school diploma. And he said, well, I think Caltech would view a year studying in Germany as worth more than another year in high school. So I had the problem solved. My mother was apoplectic. The ranch sold at Christmas time, and she found that South Pasadena had a high school where 95% of the graduates went on to four-year schools. So the family found a tiny two-bedroom apartment duplex in the southern end of South Pasadena, and we moved to South Pasadena.
What were the circumstances of selling the ranch?
It had become obvious. My father had tried to get me interested in farming, but it became really obvious that that wasn't going to work. I mean, I had gone through the process of realizing how much money people got for their calves at the county fair. So I did a deal with my father that, all right, he didn't have any problem with my calf eating grass between the avocado trees. And I could raise the calf as long as I wanted. When I decided it was time, the calf would be slaughtered, and he would pay me the graded rate of the meat as posted in the LA Times. So I did that for a year. I started out really well. I found I could for $3 I could get a 4-day-old calf, but what I didn't realize, and I only realized at the time of grading, that a dairy calf is canner and cutter at 3 days and at 1 year. It doesn't change. So I was producing the lowest grade of beef in theory. But, during the time that I was raising Oscar, his sides were getting sort of bloated. And yes, we had the scoutmaster was really well versed on cattle. And he said, well, that's because all he's eating is grass. If you want to solve that problem, you have to feed him some grain. So I would buy grain. And so Oscar got up to be 600 pounds before he was taken away. And he produced, prime beef produces usable beef that is 60% of hoof weight. Canner and cutter is supposed to be about 40%, 35 to 40%. Well, Oscar produced 65. So my dad got a really great deal. Well, the family got a really great deal. I totaled up my expenses. It was $100, and what I got was $101. So
the economics did not make sense to you.
The economics did not make sense. Also, my father let me, he offered to sell me on time a couple of rows of avocado trees. And I would take care of them and pay him back out of the proceeds. I did that for a year and came to the conclusion that I actually made more money working for him at 10 cents less than he was paying the Mexican wetback. I wasn't able to produce as much as the Mexican, therefore I shouldn't be paid as much. So, so no, it had been very clear that we weren't going to, that wasn't going to work, and that we were destined for technology, not for farming. And it took about a year and a half to sell the ranch.
Was the proximity to South Pasadena from Caltech, was that useful? Was that good for you?
My father absolutely insisted that I could not live at home. He said I lived at home when I went to college, and that was a real mistake. So in a way, I didn't have to fly across the country to come home for Christmas. But I really was totally into Caltech. I mean, the proximity wasn't important at all.
Charlie, let's return to the story about Germany. What was exciting to you about that?
It was completely unknown. When I went over, the first thing that happened was I attended the Goethe Institute in Bad Reichenhall. The Goethe Institute was set up as a school to teach foreign students German so that they could go to the universities. And my aunt had spent 4 months there to become absolutely fluent in German, and so that's where I went for the first 4 months. It was then decided, at the time I was 17, and if you look at the German school system, they run an extra 2 years, and then the kids spend a year, the men spend a year in military service before starting college. So my uncle actually decided that I would be better off being put in the Hochschule, which is the German high school, than the university, which was totally unstructured. And so I ended up spending 6 months at the Hochschule in Augsburg, and actually living in a I'm not actually sure of what denominational thing it was, but it was it was definitely a boarding school that fed into all three of the high school tracks that were there in Germany.
Did you pick up German? Did you take any German in high school beforehand?
Well, I took my correspondence course during the summer. And did I pick up? Yeah, I did. I would visit, and actually, I got a story on this one too.
Please.
I would visit my uncle occasionally, and I can remember coming back in the spring, and every time I visited him, he would get into these philosophical discussions, which would force me to question absolutely everything I believed. I mean, he would take the opposite point of view, regardless of whether he agreed with what my belief was in the beginning or not. In some ways, this was a bit devastating, because I had been really good at debating in high school. I had belonged to Junior Statesmen, and I was involved in that. But I couldn't beat my uncle at anything. I mean, I was absolutely beaten at every time. Anyway, on this occasion, I come back, and I find that I'm coming out with a German word before I can think of the English word. And then even when I'm coming out with the English word, I'm saying it in German sentence structure. So yes, I did cross the barrier, and I was totally fluent.
I wonder if that's ever helped you scientifically.
It's helped me in business. It didn't help me scientifically because when I came to Caltech, I thought I would pick up some really easy units on scientific German. And I had a book that my uncle had. It was Courant and Hilbert, Methods of Mathematical Physics. And so I said, fine. Well, no, I had that book. But anyway, I went in and I found that the course at Caltech was really just a project. It was a translation project. So I was to bring in a book, and then I was to be told how many pages I had to translate. So I bring in Courant and Hilbert. And he said, oh, unfortunately, that has been now translated up until page 167. That's fine. So I went back. It took me 3 hours to get through the first page. Another 3 hours to get through the next page. And I finally gave up. My senior year, I took a course in partial differential equations at Caltech. The text was Courant and Hilbert, which was now Methods of Mathematical Physics, which had now been translated. The first chapter gives all known solutions to ordinary differential equations. And it goes on from there. So I struck out on German being useful scientifically.
Charlie, so I understand the chronology. You went to Germany with your Caltech acceptance in hand?
No, because with my Caltech acceptance assured, but not in hand, I had taken the November SAT tests that I took were the first time I had taken SAT tests. And I got 715 in the math and 590 in the English, which would not have cut it for Caltech. But in May of that year, I had taken them again, and I had gotten 797 in math and 715 in English, which definitely did cut it. So I felt sure before I went to Germany that I would be able to get in. I wasn't accepted, but I felt certain that I could get in, that I met all I checked all the boxes.
And you applied from afar? Did you get your admissions acceptance by mail in Germany?
I officially applied from afar, and I may have gotten my acceptance in Germany. My acceptance may have been sent to my parents who were still in South Pasadena, and I was told by them. Yeah, and another part to the beginning Caltech story. When you receive the package, when I got home and that summer, and I received the package from Caltech, the thing I remember most, it was the statement, "You will have a harder time adjusting to college life than those who had to work in high school." Well, true, I had doubled up my junior and senior years, but I can't say that I actually knew that I didn't have to work in high school.
Right.
But there was no question that advice was really necessary for most of my compatriots when I went to Caltech.
Now, I'm sure I know the answer, but I can't help but ask, did the experience in Germany make you rethink your educational interests? Did you ever think about staying in Europe for your college experience, or it was Caltech unwavering the whole way?
Oh, it was Caltech. I mean, I was clearly coming back to Caltech. I love the fact that um, I understood. I understood from the standpoint of a teenager another culture. Um, I had traveled the last 2 months I was over there. You know, you could get a Eurail pass for a couple $100 that would give you 2 months of unlimited second class train travel. And so I did that. I used it. And I decided, you know, to save money, I would pick cities that were overnight apart so that I would sleep on the train. Even though I could find a room and a continental breakfast for $1 in every capital except London, and London costs $2. But so I had traveled extensively in Western Europe. I had not crossed into Eastern Europe at all. I had not gone to Berlin. And so this has all been brought up because you asked the question, was I cognizant of the Cold War during my time at Caltech? And the answer is obviously yes, because I was clearly cognizant of it from my experience in Germany.
And did you did you feel the Soviet presence in East Germany? Was that palpable?
Yeah. I mean, there was no way that I would have tried to have gone to Berlin. And so, and while in Bad Reichenhall there were paths that you could take that crossed over into Austria, where you could get dinner at an inn. So crossing back and forth across a border in Western Europe was absolutely trivial. You know, the Iron Curtain was the Iron Curtain.
When you got to Caltech, how well formed were your scientific interests? Did you have an idea of the course of study you wanted to focus on, or were you wide open? You wanted to soak as much in as you could?
Well, I thought I was interested in math, but and what you have to realize is nobody declared major until the end of the sophomore year when I first joined Caltech. So and most of the courses were prescribed. There were one or two slots that were open, but everything else, everybody took the same course. And so I thought I was interested in math. And actually, it was early in my sophomore year, taking a course in linear algebra. I think I actually dropped the course because there was no way that I was getting it. And I subsequently learned that math majors at Caltech are certifiably brilliant and usually lazy, because the only people that could play in that sandbox were certifiably brilliant. So math was out. Second choice, obviously, was physics. So I was going to go into physics. And the end of my sophomore year, my physics advisor was absolutely insisting that I take the junior level mathematicians math course. And I had seen several of the people that were a year ahead of me that I thought were awfully bright flame out on that course. And besides, one of the topics was point set theory. Point set theory is where if you've got a point A inside of a circle on a plane and a point B outside of the circle, prove that you can't draw a line from A to B that doesn't cross the circle. Well, to me, that was totally self-evident. I understand now why, if you want to work in 13 dimensions or 11 dimensions, you want to be able to do this. But it clearly, intuitively, I'm good at 3 and I'm okay at 4. But, and life has not required that I go beyond that. So anyway, that meant that I had to change from physics to engineering because that was all that was left. But fortunately, I got, interesting story. When I went to the dean and said, I want to switch from physics to engineering, the dean said, most of the time people make divisional option changes is for GPA reasons. You're moving from a place where you have a B plus to a place that you have a C plus. I had taken a survey course in electrical engineering for which I had gotten a C plus instead of taking geology. And so that was my option GPA when I switched to engineering. But engineering and science, in those days, the BS degree was principally awarded on the basis of engineering and science. It wasn't by option. And I was really fortunate to get Charlie Wiltz as my advisor. And
was he the reason of your initial interest to switch over?
No, I was given him, it was chance. It just happened. And Charlie Wiltz, engineering and applied science, in those days, anything your advisor is willing to sign off on is okay to graduate. I wanted to continue taking physics, and I wanted applied math. And then I wanted some other things which were moving in the WWII direction. And throughout all of this, my assumption was that I was going to get a PhD. I mean, there was no question in my mind, and there was no question in my family's mind, including my cousins, I would be the one that got the PhD.
And in electrical engineering, that's what you would stay on for?
No. At first it was math, then it was physics, and then it was electrical engineering.
Charlie, let's start with the math, just to get a sense of your interest and your abilities at this point. With math, given the fact that you also had interest in physics and then ultimately in electrical engineering, was it more applied math or even pure math that you were interested in?
Oh, it clearly is applied. I mean, the pure math was what I was rebelling against. And the pure math is absolutely necessary if you want to be in theoretical physics.
Right.
It is not necessary for experimental physics or engineering. And I wanted the applied math that was associated with those.
Now, in physics, was it experimental physics, or you tried your hand at theoretical physics as well?
Oh, well, hey, Caltech didn't give you any choice. I mean, if you looked at the undergraduate program, everybody, I was minus one course from having a degree in physics. Mm-hmm. It was Physics 108, which was the senior year classical mechanics course I didn't take. So I did take the senior year quantum mechanics course. And I took both of the physics courses my junior year, classical and quantum. So so there was no way that at that stage in my development that I understood I didn't really understand what the research activity of graduate school was involved in. Mm-hmm. Undergraduate research was not common. I ended up doing a little bit of it associated with part-time work in material science, but and there I was just given a project, purify and form a single crystal of silver chloride, I designed a zone refiner, and if I'd had more time, I think I would have actually gotten things to work. But I got to the point that I could make a crystal, but it wasn't pure enough that the silver chloride didn't turn black on light. But anyway, no, I didn't have any real understanding of what went on, and actually looking at, I knew that there was a project in engineering that one had to do for a thesis and a bunch of coursework. So that was my whole picture of what graduate education was.
Among the physics professors, what were some of your favorite classes or even professors that you really enjoyed?
Oh, well, Tommy Lawrenson has to take... Tommy Lawrenson taught the Layton quantum mechanics course. And I remember first term final, him coming in and saying, the results of this final make me both sad and happy. In a way, sad because I designed this test to have class average of 50, because that's what I thought I could do on it. And happy because the class average turned out to be 74. Well, I got a 54. The story goes, there were two girls in the course, all seniors in physics, and all graduate students coming into physics had to take this course. And Caltech was really biased in terms of who they accepted in women for graduate school. So these two gals were certifiably brilliant. One of them on this final got 100, and the other got 99. But I truly remember that. And so I remember him. I don't remember a name, but I can remember a junior course where a professor handed me back my homework when I had forgotten to put my name on the homework. This in many ways speaks to Caltech and speaks to small classes and real interaction.
Yeah. That's not happening in a big lecture hall.
It's not happening in a class of 50.
Charlie, you mentioned women. What about Black students or Asian students or international students? Did Caltech's undergraduate body really have any kind of diversity during your time?
Yeah, Chinese. The first year that I lived on campus, my roommate was Chinese. He was brighter than I was, more liberal than I was, and needed less sleep than I did. So certainly in any of the humanities courses, he did better than I did. And I ended up, because I crashed the end of my sophomore year, and I realized it was sleep deprivation. I moved back off campus so that I could get 8 hours sleep a night.
Now you're switched to engineering. I'm curious, just to foreshadow ahead, Did you have any entrepreneurial or business oriented notions as an undergraduate? And perhaps you saw that engineering might be a pathway to that kind of a career?
Certainly, certainly, I made the switch to engineering before I started firming up um, what I wanted to do. But as an undergraduate, I ended up taking all of the economics and psychology courses that were offered, including a reading course in economics. Um, and I had read The Organization Man. And I decided that I really wouldn't do well in that environment. And as a matter of fact, I proved that because I failed the IBM psychological test. So by my senior year, so I certainly knew that that I was going to have to follow the entrepreneurial route. By the time I entered my senior year, halfway through my senior year, actually it was at the end of the first term my senior year, I made the decision that I wasn't going to get a PhD, that I was going to return to Caltech and get an easy master's degree, and then go to Harvard Business School and play the interface between business and technology. And I made that decision, again, for the wrong reason. There was a lab course, senior year electrical engineering lab course. I did all the work. My lab partner got an A and I got a B because he wrote a prettier lab notebook. And I decided I had it. And since there were no requirements, I dropped the course, the lab course. It was a three-term running course. I apparently was the first person ever to have dropped that course, not taken it the second term. Turned out that nobody took it the third term. So it became a required course. So basically at Christmas time, my senior year, I had made the decision that I was going to come back for an easy master's degree and go to Harvard Business School. And the next term, I went to the head of the well, actually, I didn't do this until my master's year, but I went to the head of the psychology department. I said I had read all this material on Harvard Business School, and it appears that success has a lot, that people are divided into 90-person sections that take all courses together, all classes together, and that success is determined by the group norm that is formed by the 90-person section. So I went to the head of the psychology department and said, it's Professor Weir, I believe. I asked him, how do I affect group norms? And after he got me to explain why I was interested in this, he said, well, I actually can't tell you, but I can tell you how you will find out. Go to this section of the library, which at this point was in the basement of Dabney, and start at this Dewey Decimal number. Pick up a book, starting with this number, read it until it doesn't interest you anymore, put it back, and pick up the next book. I went through 2 columns of books, and I came away with a feeling that I knew how to do it. And actually, it's reasonably simple. Speak up early and often.
Charlie, to draw a parallel to your high school experience where you were a young man in a hurry and you doubled up your junior and senior year, was part of the calculus in not pursuing a PhD that you knew you wanted to go into business and that a PhD wouldn't necessarily help you in that path? So why spend the extra time?
No, um, the uh, the decision actually came down to how long it was going to take me to get a PhD after I got a BS. Um, uh, I had come to the conclusion that I wasn't going to be able to do it in 3 years. I did have a roommate that got it in 3 years in physics. No, it was Aeroastro. I'm sorry, Aeroastro. He had undergraduate in physics. But it was going to take me 5. And I didn't really want to be a slave for another 5 years. And besides that, even though I was positive I could get it, I could not play at the top levels of academia. I mean, I simply was not bright enough to do that.
Maybe since you speak German, maybe you didn't have the Sitzfleisch. Maybe that was it.
Well, I don't know, but I'm not Carver. He's got 59 Q points on me. Anyway, so I clearly wanted to do something where the people that could be at the top level of academia couldn't survive. And that was the interface. And I actually believe this is true. Very few people that are a lot brighter than I am don't make it in business. And actually, I've only learned that later. It's not popular sociologically, but an easy model is that you can communicate with people that are within about 2 standard deviations of yourself. That's 30 IQ points. At 165, you probably can't communicate with most CFOs in the Valley. And if you can't communicate with your CFO, you're not going to make it. You have to have an intermediary. And I actually found this in later life. I could tell engineers how to write test procedures, but I couldn't write test procedures for technicians. Now, there are some people that do cross this boundary, but not many.
What skill does that require, do you think?
Well, I mean, there are professors at Caltech that can speak at a level that can be understood by the college educated without speaking down to the people that are between them and the people that are college educated. I'm putting probably the centroid of the college educated at maybe 125, maybe 130. You know, 135 is generally what's used. They're not giving the number anymore for the gifted and talented programs in most of the elementary and high school settings across the country.
Charlie, you mentioned Carver. It's a question I've been waiting to ask. When did you first meet him?
Senior year. Wonderful story. Carver had this amazing ability to stand up at a blackboard and throw up resistors and capacitors and transistors and create things, okay? He had decided that he was going to teach us synthesis. Now, we were really good at analysis, but synthesis, no. And I was taking about 65 units, working 10 hours a week, and I wasn't getting it. We got to the midterm. I didn't get it. I dropped his course. He never forgave me.
Wow.
I came back the following year to get my easy master's degree. My teaching assistantship was to grade the homework of his course.
Yeah.
And that created a lifelong friendship.
Yeah. Did Carver ever try to convince you to stay on for the PhD?
No, but certainly David Middlebrook made the offer.
I wonder also, I mean, besides sort of gaming out your intellectual abilities, of course, getting the PhD requires a hyper focus in a particular area. Maybe that was just simply not your approach. Maybe that was part of it as well.
No, because what I did as my first project for HP would fully have qualified for a PhD. By the end of my master's degree, I had taken all the coursework. Well, with one exception, the Smythe E&M course that Carver thinks is utterly absurd, but was still being required because that was the only thing that Smythe could teach, and he was still around. Anyway, with the exception of that course, I had taken all of the courses I needed for a PhD in electrical engineering by the end of my master's degree level. All I had was a project. And what I ended up doing at HP, I didn't know I was going to do this when I got there, was I was to create a biomedical computer that could pull brainwaves out of the noise. I mean, and these were evoked responses, so they're not random brainwaves; they're brainwaves that are caused by something. But that was my first project, and it did take me 4 years to get it to the marketplace.
Charlie, before we leave Caltech entirely, a few more questions. First, what was Carver working on when you met him?
Whatever it was he wasn't into LSI yet.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's before.
It's before, Middlebrook was in semiconductor physics. And so that's why my later career, I actually ended up being engineering manager for an IC facility. But I don't know what he was working on. In many ways, engineering at Caltech, the course program lasts 5, maybe 5.5 years, maybe 6 years, in terms of number of years that people are taking courses. That isn't true, for example, in biology. Biology is a lab program. So you don't really have very many courses after you come in as a graduate student. And my whole view of Caltech and professors were from the perspective of somebody that took courses. Again, there was no, the undergraduate research hadn't been done as a thing. I made money part-time by being a technician in the synchrotron lab and doing other technician work, but there was no lab sorts of things you were brought in to do. And I wouldn't have had I did what Caltech absolutely hates people to do, and that is to take 60, 65 unit overloads on an every term basis. I found that the number of units that I took didn't affect my GPA. I couldn't call the grade I was going to get on any given exam. It just happened to be, was I able to make real progress on the problems that were put out, or did I make less progress? I mean, I was going to get between an A and a B in every course. Well, maybe an A minus and a B in every course.
Charlie, was there a senior thesis?
No.
And why stay on for the masters? What was the value of that you saw?
Oh, well, the value was in the credential and the fact that there was still things that I needed to learn.
Like what? What holes did you need to fill?
Well, I certainly filled holes in E&M. I filled holes. I hoped to fill a hole in computer science. Unfortunately, it ended up being more on Boolean logic, nothing having to do with computers. They were basically courses that were part of the program for getting a PhD in electrical engineering. I mean, I presumed that that the fact that there were required courses there that I hadn't taken indicated that at least somebody thought it was important.
Charlie, to foreshadow to GPS, did you take any courses in general relativity?
Well, I got that in sophomore physics. Well, special relativity. I mean, that was sophomore physics.
What was your interaction like with computers during the Caltech years? What did computers look like, and what could you use them for as a student?
Well, first of all, I went through. One of the people that lived in the same house that was still off campus, it's on campus now, did have a $400 mechanical calculator that could add, subtract, multiply, and with great difficulty divide. I got through Caltech with a 10-inch steel slide rule and a magnifying clip on it, because at Caltech, if you could get the first digit, a guess at the second digit, and you knew the order of magnitude of the problem, 1.x to 10 to the alpha, and you knew alpha. That was all you needed for an answer. As for computers, there was a Burroughs 220 on campus and a Burroughs 50 on campus, my master's degree year. And that computer, the Burroughs 50, was accessible to students. It had a drum memory, and the bits that still worked on the memory had been mapped. So if you were really clever about how you wrote your machine language program, you could use this to solve a problem. And I actually spent about 6 weeks simulating my zone refining problem on this Burroughs 50 computer. In today's parlance, it was a good start, and I got to know what I didn't know. I'm not sure that I got to the point that I did a better job of answering the question. My computer literacy exploded when I went to HP, and within the first month, I must have been told twice or 3 times by my boss, you should go over and take the non-credit course on programming the Algol computer, the Burroughs computer at Stanford, because we have access to it. And so I learned programming, and I started using computers at HP, and that was my start.
Charlie, 2 last questions for today as we round out your time for Caltech. To foreshadow really right to the present and your long devotion to supporting Caltech, do you remember as a student having a sense that Caltech had given so much to you and you hoped to achieve success and to give back? Do you remember thinking along those lines even as a student?
Honestly, no. And the reason is it would have been out of character because I'm totally future oriented. I'm always looking at the next step. The past is almost immaterial. The present has to be put up with, but it's what is in front. And it was certainly much later in life that I came to realize really how lucky I was to have gone to Caltech, and then how much I enjoyed being around Caltech people, and certainly now, because I'm thinking about it from a trustee perspective, what is it that I can do to pay back that is more than just money that I've earned, to help make the institution better? And so that's something that really became an awareness later in life as it became the future that I needed to deal with, not the future that I had directly in front of me. Because in many ways, I'm willing to deal with a 5-year time horizon, which is roughly fixed, but 10 is a little too long. I want to focus my energies basically on the next 5 years.
Now, you mentioned a Harvard MBA. Let's talk a little bit more about your motivations in thinking about pursuing an MBA.
I maybe rightly or maybe wrongly believed that if I had a Caltech master's and a Harvard MBA, I would have basically the perfect set of credentials for opening doors in technology businesses. Now, I wouldn't have been able, in retrospect now, I wouldn't have been able to have made as much use of the Harvard MBA as I thought it would give me, because I'm not really a social person, and I'm not really a person, well, to use an old phrase, that collects a Rolodex. And so, given that I probably wouldn't be able to excel on the networking aspects. I'm not sure that the degree would have been as valuable as I thought it would have been at the time.
And just like it was Caltech or bust for undergraduate, for MBA programs, this is how you felt about Harvard.
Oh, yeah. And actually, Harvard accepted me immediately out of a master's degree at Caltech. I basically said I couldn't come at Labor Day, the Labor Day, a week before I was supposed to show up. And 2 years later, I applied again, and I got accepted again, and I rejected it again at Labor Day.
A pattern. Charlie, what kind of recruiting was there on campus? Would there be industry reps? How did that work?
Yeah, there were. Both for summer jobs and for permanent employment. There was a recruiting season. We signed up for it. The recruiting took place in the top floor of Troop. It was a domed sort of thing. So it turned out that it was hard to get summer jobs. My senior year, I did get a great summer job, but it was the only offer I got. I got 30 rejections. As a matter of fact, the standard practice was to post we called them TS letters, terribly sorry, letters on our door. And so I had 30 on my door my senior year, and I had 30 on my door my graduate year. But the person that was recruiting for HP was a techer by the name of Al Bagley. And Al at the time was in charge of the frequency and time division at Hewlett Packard. And Al had driven Hewlett Packard into the digital domain, basically. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, Hewlett and Packard were running the company, and there were two division managers that actually could have been considered in the wings to replace them. Al Bagley was one, and John Young was the other. And so Al had hired me for a summer job. And he ended up during that summer bribing me into stay, and there is a story associated with that. So now we're to the number 4 techer that has had a real influence on my life. We certainly, Charlie Wiltz, Carver, David Middlebrook, and Al Bagley now. And the 5th one is somebody that I hired out of Caltech.
That's a great place to pick up for next time, Charlie.